Thank you very much. You can stay, Oliver, because you're first speaker.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone, for being here today. And also for the people on the Zoom. So for your information on Zoom, the seminars are also recorded. So also at the end, there will be also the possibility to ask questions. I suggest that we'll keep all the questions at the end of the seminar. The seminar is, I mentioned, is recorded, right? So that you know. I'm really happy to have here, as part of the partnership between EPFL and the Center for Switzerland and for Space. So no, the Center for Space and Aviation, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, to be here and to present some of the activities there, but also to present the case for future microgravity applications. We'll have 4 speakers. We have Professor Oliver Ullrich. Here on my right, we'll have also Professor Egli from the Hochschule Luzern, Dr. Cora Thiel from the University of Zurich, and Dr. Lorenz Hermann from EMPA, one of our sister organization. Thank you very much, and I let you start.
Okay, thank you so much, Manuel. It's really a pleasure for me being here, and it's also my pleasure to introduce you into a little bit what we are doing, what our vision is, and what we are looking for in the Center for Space and Aviation. Therefore, we are seeing ourselves as a docking port. That means in space, everything is about collaborating. It's about bringing things together. It's about working together. And of course, everybody knows pretty much that space often mirrors the best of human nature. That means to cooperate, to create, to build things together. Probably you can remember or not, depends on your age, that the Apollo program was the largest interdisciplinary program of all time, a really huge program. And of course, the International Space Station is one of the most complex international research platforms with over 4,000 publications, 4,000 experiments, more than 100 countries involved. Therefore, an enormous knowledge has been generated on board of the International Space Station. And probably you know as well that we are currently preparing for the next industrial era, where we are not only using data, but also products from space. Therefore, it is a really huge transformation, because production microgravity will be very clearly a game changer. It ranges from in vitro tissue engineering to pharmaceuticals, to semiconductors, to optical fibers, because of the fact that microgravity enable an advantage in all things you have to do in 3 dimensions. And therefore, very important is that all these applications connect directly to traditional value chains. Therefore, it's not about just bringing things into space or high-tech products back from space. It's about connecting to already existing value chains and industry. Therefore, we are completely entering a completely new phase. And thanks to the usable systems like SpaceX Starship and the Star Lab system of Voyager and Airbus, transport cost and capacity on orbit are about to drop dramatically. Transport capacity will be cheap, around $100 each kilogram. And of course, thanks to the new space stations, orbital capacity are no longer a limit. It will increase huge and dramatically. But of course, as you can see here in the red frame, it's not all about technology. We really need a systemic transformation. And why we need that? Because the current system is too slow, it's too exclusive, it's too disconnected. They are, of course, silos in academic and in industry. People are not working really together. And therefore, also lead times for experiments, for R&D, for production are too long. And therefore, we have to solve that problem and have to transform the way how we are working together on ground in parallel to the new stations. That's important. And in our University of Zurich, where I'm coming from, we started very, very slowly to overcome these barriers. First, we built a strong position for Zurich to become a European new space hub. And we started 10 years ago initiating research and development flight program in Dübendorf, 2015. We started with parabolic flights, but not only with parabolic flights. We also used the Zeppelin and other flight platforms as well. And we acquired the knowledge, the experience, and the processes which are required for flight testing and for early testing in early technology stages. Then second, the University of Zurich Space Hub has been funded in 2018. And UZ8 Space Hub provides scientific excellence, innovation, and then finally 2024, the Center for Space and Aviation, Switzerland Liechtenstein, brings together know-how, experience, and I would always say the software of the ecosystem, and fourth, the Innovation Park in Zurich, which offers more than 70 hectares of land, providing the hardware base together with an active and functional airfield. We are in the Center for Space and Aviation, currently 11 universities in 2 countries and 11 institutions together with the Swiss Air Force. And we are very closely working together with the Innovation Park Switzerland in Dübendorf. And why Dübendorf? Of course, there is also a pretty nice place here, but why Dübendorf is also important. We are, of course, quite young, but Dübendorf is probably one of the places to be for the new space economy, because Dübendorf combines an airfield, an innovation park, world-class universities surrounding us, and of course a broad coalition of space actors and great infrastructure around us, and in one of Europe's strongest economic regions. And then, of course, Dübendorf, the cradle of Swiss aviation, with a long aviation history. And furthermore, we have political stability, political backing, and of course, we see Dübendorf as one exceptional place for the new space economy, and we are going exactly in that direction. And here, always space needs partnerships, and because space needs partnerships, we are expanding our international positioning. It's focus area number 1. Then, of course, space needs innovation, so we support and shape research and development. Space needs strong new space environment, so we build an emerging space ecosystem. Space needs infrastructure. You need physical infrastructure, real infrastructure, airplanes, an airport, access to space, test facilities. That's very physical and it's pretty much important. Therefore, we secure access and to drive its development regarding our physical infrastructures. And of course, space needs talent. Therefore, we invest in education and workforce development. And for exactly that reason, we found the Center for Space and Aviation, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, CSA. We have brought lines of willing partners working bottom up together. And it's a great coalition where we are able to exchange finances, personnel, access to infrastructure, projects as well. And therefore, it's all about to collaborate. That's the reason why we have the Center for Space and Aviation. And what we also can offer in Dübendorf is a real end-to-end infrastructure. Therefore, we are able from research development and mission planning, we can do flight testing, we can do launch site processing because of our laboratories and offices and workspaces at the Kennedy Space Center, which we already have for more than 10 years directly on site. And then, of course, the famous Hochschule Luzern regarding space operations. Therefore, it is an already existing complete and operational pipeline, already there, already existing, established, ready for scaling. And what we like to do is, and what we are really doing, we are working closely together with our innovation park. And our aim is to create a European hub serving the needs of Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and surrounding countries for research, but also trade and logistics. Therefore, we currently combine a ground system for R&D and testing, including full-scale parabolic flight program, which we are extending in the next years. And we will also establish a customs airport with a designated duty-free zone, allowing import and export to Switzerland from neighboring countries, and allowing, of course, import and export to the United States. That means this infrastructure concept will enable European companies, European institutions to develop, to integrate, and to qualify space systems within Europe, and to transfer them directly from Dübendorf to the launch site in Florida. Therefore, all these activities and plans are already in our agreements with Space Florida. Space Florida is the Spaceport Development Authority of the state of Florida in the United States. And therefore, what we here like to do is to develop a multi-dimensional hub for R&D, for transport, logistics, production, and for the space economy in and around Dübendorf. And because it's an airfield, we are not only serving Switzerland and Liechtenstein, we are also serving our neighboring countries. And just last week, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the state of Bavaria in terms of a close collaboration in space and aviation, together with the industrial sector and together with the academic sector. And with Baden-Württemberg, we already have discussions also to sign an agreement to work together. Therefore, we really try to connect and to bring institutions and also countries together in a new space economy. Therefore, we already connected with the global space economy. With Space Florida, we are becoming the European hub. They are calling us European hub for logistics, research, and innovation. With Starlab, Voyager, and Mitsubishi, our partners as well, and others, we are part of the next generation space station architecture on orbit and on ground. And with our partners like University of Florida, Seastars, and the Space BioHub in Florida, we are linked in many dimensions and many multiple layers to the Florida space ecosystem. Therefore, what we like to do in our Center for Space and Aviation, we want just to go beyond silos. We want to connect, we want to enable, we want to cooperate, and finally, of course, we want to serve the idea of a new architecture of global knowledge creation between space and Earth. And in the next lectures, you will see some examples what we are doing regarding our academic research and our connection to industry. Thank you so much.
So, hi everyone. My name is Marcel Egli, and I'm representing today the Hochschule Luzern, the Lucerne University of Applied Science and Arts, and BIOTESC, and I will tell you more about this, as well as I'm also representing the University of Zurich, and with that, the National Center for Biomedical Research in Space. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to the activities we're doing there, activities that we bring into CSA to make that consortium strong and have a certain viability there so that people can profit from the know-how that's there. I would like to start my my talk with some history, some historical approaches, how everything started, because this is quite interesting and nobody knows about this, because it started a long, long time ago, almost 50 years ago, that Switzerland entered, an activity that led to a lot more and to a huge field that is now taken care by various researchers worldwide. So there was this idea from Augusto Gogoli in 1977 to expose immune cells, T lymphocytes to be more precise, to microgravity. Kind of silly idea to let cells, of the human body be exposed to microgravity and then look for changes. But apparently it actually did change something. So even small cells are responding to the gravity, the missing gravity in space. And as I said, this actually triggered a lot of interest for researchers. And because of this knowledge they gained there, in 2000, they signed a contract to take over in Switzerland a center called BIOTESC. This is a user support and operational center responsible for all the biological and biotechnological experiments that are conducted in space. And soon after, they started building various bioreactors for cultivating human blood cells, but also yeast. And you see that one was the first bioreactor that was flown. And this was 1992 2 or 3, something like that. Yeah, we were able then, you know, based on all that knowledge and that expertise we gathered through all these years, to open a National Center for Biomedical Research in Space, which is now located at CSA in Dübendorf. Here you have some, you know, evolution of the bioreactors that we produced. The first one, the design was so cool back then, NASA took it over. So NASA rebuilt exactly that tool over there to have it, you know, processed in their research. And we developed further bioreactors. We were even able to use the fighter jet of the Swiss Army in Emmen. So we had the bioreactors there, thanks to help of Oliver Ullrich, who helped to actually use the bioreactor there. So that was kind of cool story. We were focusing on the cytoskeleton of the cells there. And we had private access to great parabolic flights there. And other spheroids, this was a bioreactor for focusing on cancer cells, tumor growth in microgravity 20 years ago. So we did that already. And Semios and others, so we'll show it there. Of course, we developed further. We're regularly on parabolic flights. As you can see here, we have hardware that we built by ourselves. So the beauty of being a University of Applied Science is that you can use the engineers in-house and build it right away. So you don't have to wait for industry or whatever complex processes or so. Now you go just to the colleagues and say, hey guys, I need something like this, you know, can you 3D print this by tomorrow? And I can test it by tomorrow. So this is really cool. And we use that, and this is really the beauty. So we have a lot of interaction with students coming in from various places, also from EPFL actually. So we had people coming from EPFL to our place to do their PhDs. Semios, this is a student initiative. We flew a couple of years ago. Also, students came together on the framework of Rexus Pexus. You probably know this. This is a student activity organized by ESA and Germany, DLR, and Sweden together. So that's also something for you if you're interested. You could apply for a sounding rocket flight with ESA, sounding rocket or balloon, you know, depending. So this is the bioreactor story and the experiments we did. But because we produced these bioreactors, we actually thought about increasing the use of the bioreactors. Not only have mammalian cells cultivated in there, we also wanted to have algae and other stuff, you know, cultivated in there to come up with kind of self-sustaining system to produce on-site biomass, for example, for bioprinting, for food, for fuel, for whatever, you know, you can do this in a closed bioreactor system as shown here. This is a very simple structure here, but of course that could lead to something bigger that eventually, you know, produce O2 in a station, wherever, circling Earth, Moon, Mars, whatever, or to let it run on the lunar surface or the Martian surface. So that's still a core business we are doing, and we're very happy to collaborate, to bring in students or so to actually increase the output of these kind of studies. One thing we also strong in is actually to have simulation going on. Before you actually send stuff into space, it's clever to actually test it on ground, to see whether microgravity induces a change that you think of. And for that, we have this random positioning machine, as you see the picture up there. And the working principle is very simple. Instead of having a sample just placed on the lab bench and let it grow the cells in there, we're turning the cells in any direction. And so over time, the gravity vector, you know, is averaged to 0 because it pulls on every side at the same duration. Of course, you need to run a good algorithm that coordinates the engines turning, the system. But once that is organized, and once you have that, you can actually simulate microgravity in the lab. You can also simulate Martian gravity or moon gravity. You can tell the machine not to average the gravity vector, the remaining gravity vector, to 0. You can also tell them, no, I need 0.6, 0.2, whatever. And that's the cool thing. So you can actually use this for various systems. Another story I would like to tell you real quick is the application of astronauts doing research. So we're using astronauts like, subjects that we expose to microgravity. And interestingly, being in microgravity is similar to aging. So you have an advanced and faster aging process in space. And this can be used for various research. Our main goal now is to investigate the degeneration process of IVDs, intravertebral discs, because these discs, when they're bad, they're causing low back pain. And this is something probably everybody of us experienced low back pain already, or will experience low back pain in the future. So anyway, this is a huge problem. And we're using astronauts to do so, to actually learn more about these processes. And we were able to interact with astronauts the day they're coming back from the station in Houston. So we were measuring them, and we found out that some guys, they have a strong back and nothing happens. So this is the first graph. But, there are also other guys, they really suffer. So the muscle atrophy that is taking place under microgravity is really also doing its work on the back. And so lordosis and kyphosis are kind of enhanced. So they're really, going in this, and over time, this can damage the IVDs. And this is what we also investigated on parabolic flights. You see that the plane that is now going into a parabola, now it's 2G phase, and you see underneath the movement of the spine. So there is something going on. And if you're staying for 6 months in space, or let's go to Mars, and you have 7 months or whatever, 8 months, that's really doing something. So we need to know these kind of details. So goal is to, on one side, to actually take care of the astronauts, finding out what's going on, but translate this information to the problems we have on ground, and actually use, the findings to come up with new approaches for IVD replacements or things like that. So that's a cool story. And to do so in the lab, we created bioreactors to expose isolated IVDs from a cowtail. This is a regarded animal tool that you're using in research to investigate IVDs. To expose these IVDs to simulate microgravity, and then also exposing them to various mechanical stimulations like pressure, compression, flexion, or torsion. We have built-in engines to drive this. And again, this is done by students most of the time. Here, this is a story about a new thing that we're doing, space farming. So our idea is to make use of the lunar or the Martian regolith that's there. And, that's very poor soil to grow plants, tomatoes, whatever, So we need to fertilize that to be able to grow that stuff on a Martian greenhouse. But bringing up nitrogen, for example, this is a huge thing. You have to ship a lot of this material up there. So it's ideal if you use the stuff that it's there and actually have microorganisms working for you to increase the interaction between the root cells on the tip of the roots and microorganisms. And we showed that this is working under microgravity or simulated microgravity so that we can actually enhance the uptake of nutrients by the plants. So this could be something that will help then on potential moon or Martian stations. And out of that, we created this ESA ground-based facility. So we thought that this is a great idea for also other researchers to make use of the facility we have to actually use gravity, various gravity, as I explained before, use the greenhouse soil from Moon or Mars. You can buy this, you know, there is Moon or Martian regolith analogs available, so you can grow your plants on that soil. We have lighting condition, of course, that we can recreate, and we have the atmosphere in a special tube, in a pressure chamber, that we can recreate the atmosphere, the potential atmosphere in a greenhouse. So that's the research we're doing right now, and this is, of course, available for students who are interested in projects, but is also part of CSA as a feature of the whole CSA environment that we have built up at Dübendorf. And finally, just a few words on BIOTESC, the space subs we're doing. So I mentioned that we started in 2000 with this contract. So we are an ESA entity. And as an ESA entity, we're supporting astronauts or researchers when they're doing biological or biotechnological experiments in space. So over the years, since 2000, we have more than 280 experiments, you know, like assisted or were there, because whenever you do an experiment in space, a biological experiment, then it comes to us. And we will then check for the safety measures for everything. So whenever you are doing something with ESA that is related to space, it will come to Hergiswil. So you're free to contact us, through CSA, to get input on what you can do in space. And we will tell yes or not, because we're part of ESA. We're actually giving them the advice, yes, this is hardware that can be used, or no, it needs to be redone. This is the team. We're a small team at Hergiswil in Lucerne, but they're highly certified. They got training from ESA. They're able to talk to the astronauts on the voice loop. So this is what we can offer through CSA. And there are just a few remaining centers in Europe. So you see there are 4 other centers, but one will be closed soon. So there are just 4 of these centers doing the job, working together with the astronauts in space. Beside research, and I told you that we're cultivating yeast in space, that's also something you can do. When you have yeast in space, you can actually send the yeast that was in space to a brewery and then brew nice stuff. So we did that, you see, in 1916, the first Luzerner beer. Then we had another beer edition, and soon there will be another beer. The other yeast strain sent to space. It's really space. It's not just some fake stuff. It has been in space. Beer will be brewed, and then you can buy that stuff through our channels. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. All right.
So good afternoon also from my side. My name is Cora Thiel, and I'm the Vice Director of the Institute of Aerospace Medicine at the University of Zurich, and I'm also in the Board of Directors of the Center for Space and Aviation. And I'm very happy to take you on a little overview journey of our research during the almost last 20 years at the University of Zurich. We are addressing the question how cells, human cells, react to altered gravity. And we are focusing especially on immune cells, human immune cells, lymphocytes, and macrophages. And we are doing this in a multi-platform approach. What this means, I will show you a bit later in the next slide. We are looking for many different signaling pathways. We were looking for a lot of different molecules, the metabolism of the cells, functional parameters, and cytoskeletal dynamics. And as you can see here, we were also focusing really extremely on gene expression responses. I said we do a multi-platform approach, which means that all these different platforms we use, from parabolic flights for very short-term experiments of a few seconds, then we use suborbital rocket experiments to see for first adaptation reactions in those cells at about 5 minutes. And of course, if we want to do longer experiments, we have experiments on board of the International Space Station for hours, days, or weeks. And all this is, of course, complemented with our ground-based platforms, clinostats, and centrifuges. And all this is to cross-validate so that the findings are real and not artificial effects from one of the platforms. And of course, to see and understand the time course of the mechanisms. And we have quite some experience here. So you see, we have been already on 17 parabolic flight campaigns, 9 suborbital and 9 orbital missions. This slide here summarizes very nicely our results. So you see, we looked at many, many different cell types, and basically we could identify a very, very fast initial response within a few seconds, and sometimes within less than 1 second. But we also could see a very fast adaptation happening already after a few minutes. One of our, let's say, very big experiment was XXXA on board of the International Space Station. And this was really a key experiment to show how immune cells are responding and adapting to altered gravity. We were looking here for the production of reactive oxygen species that immune cells, especially macrophages, are producing when they encounter microorganisms. And we put those cells here. You see Samantha Cristoforetti, and this is the BioLab facility. So a centrifuge on this facility. So we put those cells on a centrifuge. We're centrifuging them to Earth gravity for about 3 hours. And then we stopped the centrifuge and looked what happened. And you can see here, there is happening something which is zoomed in here. So here is the stop of the centrifuge of 1G, and the cells are exposed to microgravity, and you can immediately see a breakdown in the signal for all 4 measurements. And then, I mean, we did not do anything else. So you see the cells and the reaction is recovering within about 42 seconds, and then the reaction is normally taking place like it would take place on Earth. And with this experiment, we could really demonstrate for the first time in real-time measurements, so really got the download in real time from the ISS, that mammalian cells are able to adapt to microgravity within seconds. Well, basically, we were asking the question, how can this non-specific force of gravity and changes in gravity be transduced into a specific cellular response? Like we saw a lot of gene expression responses and changes in the cells, and how can that happen? Basically, the big question is, how can the signal of altered gravity be transported from the outside of the cell really to the inside of the cell, to the nucleus where we have the chromatin? And basically, there are 2 theories or 2 ways possible. First, it's a chemical signal propagation where you have the classical receptor, and then there is a molecule binding to the receptor, and the signal is transported inside with second messengers towards the nucleus, but this takes a long time. So we are here in the range of up to 10 seconds. And if you remember, I told you we see a reaction already after 1 second, so this can't be possible. But there's a second way, that's the mechanical force propagation. And the good thing is we have the cytoskeleton here within the cell, which is attached on one side to the plasma membrane and on the other side to the nuclear envelope. And you see here the chromatin, the DNA, is also attached to the nuclear envelope, which means if I push here, I have a direct propagation of the force inside the nucleus, and I shift here and I change the position of the chromatin. And this happens in about 1 millisecond, so super fast. And here we have a reaction within seconds. And this is exactly what we identified. If I go one slide back, and you imagine you push in here the chromatin, so an entire chromatin loop will change its position. And and this is exactly what we identified. We did not see single individual genes changing in gene expression, but we identified entire chromosomal regions, like these black bars presented here on chromosome 16 to 22, so on the small chromosomes. Entire regions were changing for overexpression or underexpression, and we very nicely combined these data with a 3D chromosomal conformational changes experiment, which means where we looked how does the position of the chromatin change inside the cell. And these are here, these red bridges that you can see everywhere, and you see very nicely that we have a very close association of the chromosomal regions and the parts where the position is changing inside the chromatin. So with this, we could show that gravitational force-induced 3D chromosomal conformational changes are very closely associated with the rapid transcriptional response in the immune cells. And our results made a very significant contribution to the understanding how cells, especially immune cells, are responding to changes in gravity. And a big part of our publications were cited in this very recent Nature review, Immunology. Of course, we are very happy about this. And by ending this part of our fundamental research, I would like to take you onto another journey, second part of my presentation, which is to show how can we use this knowledge and experience from the many years of basic research to be utilized in microgravity to manufacture products that are impossible or difficult to produce on Earth. This project was made as a public-private partnership between the University of Zurich and Airbus Defence and Space, and we were choosing organoids and the production of organoids in space as our project. What are organoids? They are self-organizing 3D in vitro culture systems, so human mini tissues, so to say, and they are recapitulating the in vivo architecture, functionality, and genetic signature of the original tissue. They are quite important because they can be used for disease models, preclinical drug development, and precision and transplantation medicine. However, I mean, maybe you can ask, but people are producing them on Earth. On Earth, it's very difficult and very complex and sophisticated to produce them because the cells do not assemble by themselves. So if you have those cells in cell culture, they just grow in 2D and not in 3D. And if you want to have them growing in 3D, you need really additives or supportive structures, which making a standardization of this process very, very problematic. So this means there is an unsatisfied market demand for standardized organoids, and our concept was to use microgravity as a tool to produce organoids under force-free conditions. So the idea was very simple. You take stem cells. In our case, it was stem cells from the bone marrow, mesenchymal stem cells. You proliferate them, so you make them divide, and you add a nutrition cocktail so that they start differentiation into the tissue that you want them to mature to. Then you bring them into microgravity for a certain time, and there something happens which does not happen on Earth. So here they have nothing to attach to, but they stick to each other and they attach to each other and then naturally form 3D structures without any scaffolds or additives or supporting structures. And then after a certain time, you just bring them down and you produced, for example, liver, bone, or cartilage tissue, which can directly be used for research and development, replacement of animal experiment, or precision medicine, or in the long term can be used for transplantation. And this means you can give back the patient here who is in need of a transplantation. You can give him back his own material without any artificial substances. So you avoid rejection reactions there. This project was launched in 2018 and we were quite quick because within only 3 years, we went from the first idea to 2 full productions in space. Currently, this project and this technique is commercialized by a company. It's a UCH spin-off called Prometheus Life Technologies. I have 2 more slides just for the data to show you. So here you can see these are the different organoids, little mini tissues that formed. We tested it for 5 different tissues: cartilage, bone, fat, liver, and neuronal tissue. And the very surprising thing was that we sent up 253 test samples to the ISS, and actually in each of the test vials we received an organoid which was 100%, and this is somehow very surprising because usually you don't have 100%, but this shows how super robust this technique is and how robust this environment is for the production of the organoids. Of course, we did some analysis and tests in histology. You can see here our control in ground control in 2D cell culture, which does not look very nice. Here you have textbook reference images, and here these are the tissues that we analyzed that were on board of the ISS, and you can see they are very alike to the textbook reference images. We had a second mission. I told you we had 2 full space flights, and of course, maybe you say, well, you were very lucky. Maybe you could have played the lottery. It was 1 donor and maybe it was just luck. So therefore we said, okay, we take more donors, in total 5. So we had the original donor from the first mission, and then we had 2 different male donors and 2 female donors to see if there is a gender difference or if there is an age difference. So the donors were between 44 and 72 years old. We did the same procedure, and in fact, we had again 100% formation of organoids into all test samples. In this mission, we also tested transport of post-flight living organoids. Of course, if institutes or companies would like to take them for their tests, medical tests, for example, they need to be transported and further cultivated in cell culture. We tested all this, and also this was very successful, and basically we were able to cultivate them until 62 days without loss of quality. Why 62 days? Because I always took like week after week a sample to analyze, and at some time point we had no samples left. So therefore we can say they are good for 62 days in cell culture and most likely even longer. Of course, we also did here the typical analysis for the organ-specific functional proteins, and you can see they are full. I mean, they are really stained fully with these proteins, and they are the proteins are distributed very homogeneously. So also the tests were very successful. So it's, of course, then it was time to bring it into application, and therefore the UGH startup Prometheus Life Technologies formed. They are very successful, so they won several prizes and challenges like the Reef Starter Innovation. They were accepted into the ESA Business Incubator. They are part of the ESA Business in Space Growth Network, and they won the Humans in Space Challenge and an InnoSwiss grant last year. So, and with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
So,
Okay, so then good afternoon also from my side. My name is Lorenz Herrmann. I'm department head at EMPA, responsible for a department called Advanced Materials and Surfaces. And I'll give you an overview what we as EMPA, national lab on basically with a core competence of material science, can contribute to space and the Space Alliance, and hopefully more broadly, the Swiss space landscape. So what is EMPA? So basically, we're a national lab. We have about 1,100 people. We are part of the ETH domain. So it's EPFL, ETH, and then 4 national labs, as you might know. One of them is EMPA. And we work on 4 different research focus areas, ranging from nanoscale materials manufacturing technologies. That's my area. I'll explain that in more detail. Then built environment. That's everything around civil engineering, also energy management. Then health. Health, we do research on materials for health. I think there's also some kind of interesting connection points to what we have heard before. No pharmaceuticals, but also the interface between biological cells and, let's say, inorganic materials, implants, what happens at the interface, the surfaces, and so forth. That's this area. And last but not least, energy, resources, and emission. That's pretty broad. It goes from, let's say, more engineering, physics-based technologies, battery technologies, solar cells, all the way to emissions. I mean, EMPA also has the federal task of the air quality monitoring in Switzerland, for instance, and then there's a lot of also research associated with that. And I'll show you also an example what this has to do with space. Then a bit more, I mean, basically, how do we work at EMPA? I said, we are part of the ETH domain, but unlike, let's say, the universities in Switzerland, I mean, we are not only committed to let's say, curiosity-driven research, but we also have a mission. So mission that basically fits well to space, yes, but it's more general. So our mission basically is to bring disruptive research in terms of material science. So I draw this sketch here. So you see that on the nanoscale material science. So material design synthesis, modeling, going all the way down to the single atom quantum worlds. That's really our domain. So this is the fundamental part. But then we would not stop there, but we continue also with the manufacturing technology. So we basically do research on the engineering part, the process route, the monitoring, diagnostics to bring the quality up. Because our research in the end is already from the basics selected such that it should end up in an application. This is the EMPA mission. So we do, let's say, fundamental research. It can also be long-term, but it should end up in an application. And I tried to now find an example which basically reflects this path in space science. I have this in more detail afterwards. So you see here, metal 3D printing. So there's the material side. There is basically the powder engineering. So as I will show, we develop new materials for metal 3D printing. So that's basic metallurgy in principle. Then we look at the process. You see this in the manufacturing. What you see there on the top in the middle, this is laser powder bed fusion. So basically with the laser, layer by layer, you create the parts. We do the modeling associated with that. By the way, also with a colleague we just met for lunch from EPFL, Anirudh, the professor here at EPFL. He's also involved in this research. And then finally, we do devices. So there should be basically a technology which can be transferred to an industrial partner or ESA in order to implement this. And now as an example, there's shape memory alloys. So basically alloys, when you do a trigger like heat, they go back to their initial shape. Or, and this is the example I show, rocket engine parts, where you need special new powders, basically need to go along this chain. So that's what I quickly wanted to illustrate in the way how we work, and we try to do this in basically all the areas we're active. So, and then again, this is probably not the complete list, but at least this is what I found as current examples of space projects related to material science and monitoring we have at EMPA, and I'll walk you through this afterwards. So it goes from joining technology, so bringing two materials together might sound trivial in the first place, but actually we will see it is not. Then metal 3D printing, then more the energy part, photovoltaics, batteries, then also a lot of analytics, X-ray analytics in this case, some more fundamental research we do on the ESS, so the bulk metallic glasses, and then remote sensing technology, plus some thermal insulation for space. This is the example I'll rather quickly probably walk you through. So here, this first example, and I always just if somebody's interested, put the contact name of the responsibles in the different EMPA laboratories. This is joining for space instrumentation. We have a pretty long history in this. So you see here the different missions we were active, a lot of times with the University of Bern. There was a close link between us and the University of Bern. And basically, one of the main tasks is to design the joint such that it has a high quality, especially with the big thermal gradients. No, if in space something you have depending if you're towards the sun, away from the sun, you can have very quickly these temperature cycles. And then, as you might know, materials have different thermal expansion coefficients. And then for a joint, this leads to very high mechanical stresses. And the way to design this is one of our competences. Now, this is one thing. On the sustainability side also, an example we're currently working on. As you may know, some of the materials should not be used in the future anymore because they're maybe a bit toxic or so. There is the so-called REACH list where more and more materials are banned. And one of them is lead. And often in joining, we use lead. And what also we develop now, even for space, are these lead-free sustainable solutions. So that's also a project. So 2 examples out of this field. Then a little bit in more detail of what I already explained on my first example. So it's the 3D printing. Basically, as you might know, there has been a huge activity around 3D printing, mainly metal 3D printing, around the last, I would say, 10, 15 years. Enormous hope. Some of this will stay, but we also currently see that 3D printing, additive manufacturing is also consolidated a bit. One also notices that's not the solution for everything, especially for mass fabrication often, because it's kind of digital. It's often also not the ideal choice. But of course, there is some things, spare parts, implants, which need to be tailored to each person, where this will stay and is very, very good. Now with space, we also hope and see an enormous new application. And all of you probably have seen from SpaceX this video where the rocket comes back now. Basically, the rocket coming back and can be reused. But actually, this means if you want to reuse these engine plus rocket parts, that you need extremely high performance alloys. So you need different materials than if you just have disposable rocket engines, which you use once and then they fall down and they are done. So therefore, we started quite some activity to develop new alloys. In this case, mainly these so-called oxide dispersion strengthened alloys, super alloys. So this is very, you can imagine, very tough, high temperature resistant alloys in order to reuse them. Now, these are alloys. Basically, that means it's different metals coming together in one material. And then those of you who are in material science, they know you get phase diagrams, quite complex to really have then the right phases. And then on top to create these spherical powders, it's not so easy. So you need the right shape for the 3D printing. That's then for the process, because the powder has to flow nicely. So it's then more about the way it moves. Plus then, of course, the right material. And then when you melt it up, you still need to stay in the right phase. So it's also about cooling rates of this material. So it's quite a fundamental field first, which then, along the lines I sketched in the beginning, moves into an application. So we really see this as one of these disruptive fields, which in material science, where we could make an impact in space science on these topics. And one really sees, in order to do it right, you really need to go through all these steps. You cannot just get some and try, but you really need to go these steps. And we also even do our own materials powders. And in order to do these powders with these special alloys, it's also quite demanding, and you need unique infrastructure. Good. That being said, that's also nice. I mean, being part of the CSM, of course, is a very good thing. But then we also somehow have the duty to bring projects. No, we need to basically. It's good to have this teamwork, but now we need to fill it with projects. And this is exactly. We're happy. We just won a project together. Is that even a startup from the region here? No. Yes. There's a event, and together with CSA and EMPA, we just won a project in this ESDE call from the PHI Center, from the ESA PHI Center, on exactly doing these super alloys, which I just very briefly tried to mention. So that's then already a first collaboration that will kick off between us and EPFL spin-off and CSM on this topic. Good. Then a bit more history. The other one will kick off. There we have quite a history. That's on solar cells. We have seen before the solar cells of ESS. So that's nowadays mainly germanium, very reliable, but very expensive. And the question is a bit, okay, now with this democratization of space and these many private space stations, do we need to stay with that, or can we also do something different? And at EMPA, we have been working quite a long time on so-called thin film solar cells. So these are flexible solar cells. So that's kind of a niche. Yeah? That's a niche. The thing is, you could in principle fold them. And ultra thin, lightweight, flexible, high specific power. They also, depending on the material, there's different ones, different types of new semiconductor. They are quite radiation resistant. So let's say compared to silicon, if you have space, right, on Earth somewhere, if you want to do a solar field, it's not the choice you want to do, especially with the price of the silicon modules right now, you just go for silicon. But this could be, in fact, an application where there would be a benefit to have something foldable, no? Because then for the start. And we have an ESA project on this, looking exactly into this topic. So the often EMPA's competence is actually on thin films. So basically stacking different materials, the interfaces, joining, as I said before, but then also the functionality and the quality of these materials, both from the understanding plus from the manufacturing. And then when I speak about thin film solar cells, we have other things, other electronic components based on thin films. And the second one here, that's thin film batteries. Now, here actually, and that is a startup. It's at the moment, there's always this list where I think one of EPFL startups is number one, the one who do chip cooling. I forgot the name. There was always this list. Yeah, probably this most famous startup in Switzerland. I think that our startup battery is also in the top 10, and they do these thin film batteries. They were also in the ESA big incubator. And what they do solid state batteries. Does anyone know what a solid state battery is? If not, I quickly explain. So normally in a battery, you always have cathode and anode, so two electrodes, plus you have here a separator, and then you have the space where the lithium ions need to travel. Electrodes. And normally, this is a liquid because then they have high mobility and they can travel. But the disadvantage is that this can burn. And this, I don't know, if a fire in a space station, maybe not so nice. Outside, of course, it would not burn, but inside. Now, people more and more do research, EPFL, EMPA, ETH everywhere on these solid state batteries, where you basically have solid electrolytes. So then the ions need to travel through the solid. You can also imagine it's more difficult. So the mobility of the ions in a solid is something to study and to find out. And the trick here is that they go for a very, very thin battery, thin film battery, and so also all the problems which you can get with the solid electrolyte, also mechanics breaks, is then can be better controlled, and it's a first step towards this solid state battery. And what's also is, in batteries always you have a trade-off between power and energy. Either if you want normally a battery for a car, you optimize the energy density, so you have a lot of capacity, but then it's nothing where you can put a lot of power at the same time. So in the electric grid, there often we speak about supercaps. And such a battery, this would be a good compromise. So if one now stacks this one above the other, one could have high power because of the thin battery, plus also a decent energy density because you stack them. Disadvantages, they are quite expensive, but of course for space it could make sense. We would again have this special application where in the end the benefit would be enough. And I mean, it's also relative how expensive. So the CEO Moritz Futscher, he told me if they did, or at some point in the future they went into consumer electronics for a mobile phone, he said it would be 20 or 30 francs more. And then you could charge it in 2 minutes if everything works. And I think that people would pay. Maybe not everyone, but to charge an empty phone in 30 francs, I think that's still reasonable. Yeah. So that was that. Then, now this is a more fundamental bulk metallic glasses. This is Antonia Nail's colleague, who is doing since a long time research on the ESS on these materials. So it's basically about quick cooling and to have certain properties of these metallic glasses. Basically, the main point is mechanical strength with outstanding elasticity. This is normally you have very high strength and something very brittle. And we discussed this during lunch for a different application. With Martin, which I will not mention now, but this is exactly a combination which is extremely desirable. Again, of course, high thermal gradients, and these challenges. Operation under extreme condition, wear, scratch, corrosion resistant. So it would be an extremely nice material. And here is what Antonia prepared for me, a couple of applications in the space, which would also be very favorable, where this material would be very favorable. Good. Then I quickly also mentioned analytics. We do a lot of analytics. So what we have done is, also failure analysis. Basically then, especially on our industrial collaboration side, these services are always very important because then working with the agencies and companies from the failure analysis, you also see a bit where the problems are. So that triggers the pain points. This triggers new thinking of what kind of new ideas research would come. So this is here an example of a satellite which we looked at. And what we also have, we have pretty macroscopic equipment. So we have pretty big scanners at EMPA where we can also really scan big parts. So this is often then asked for these applications. And last but not least, this is Barbara Putz, who arrived a couple of years ago at EMPA, who has, even before she arrived, kind of a history in doing composite materials. So again, layers of different materials for thermal insulation. And that is maybe a bit small. I think I have here a better picture on top. Quite often, and this probably you all know, you need to pack material also in space. You need to thermally insulate because what's inside the box doesn't like these gradients and the low temperatures. One probably very famous example was this Mars drone, no? Which basically went to Mars, was set down. And then the problem, it had these solar panels, and then it had to survive, the battery had to survive the night. So they really needed to insulate until the sun comes back and energize. And therefore, of course, again, very lightweight insulation systems need to be designed, which are maybe even radiation resistant and protect what's inside, plus also are mechanically very resistant. And what Barbara then specialized on is here this polyamide aluminium, basically stacked systems. So aluminium polyamide, very lightweight, and then designing this interface. You see here a bit the thermal cycling, adhesion. Then she looked at the whole degradation, as I just said, yeah. And finally, this is what she's doing now. She has an UC starting grant now, where she looks to really engineer this interface with, that's maybe a bit more for the specialist now, the small atomic layer deposition interlayers. And then she puts between the aluminium and the polymer, she puts a material which she calls alucone, which is something in between a metal and a polymer to make the interface a bit mechanically softer, elastic. And then, of course, this all needs to be analyzed on with the characterization also on small scale with transmission electron microscope or even atom probe, where you can really go on the atomic level. Good. All right. This is also still what now I change a bit gears. This is a bit from what I said before. Maybe you remember my 4 pillars that I had. And I also had this environmental sensing. And I told you that we also monitor the air quality in Switzerland. Now, here the group is the lab of Lukas Ebenegger, and the scientist working on it is Gerrit Kuhlmann. Also long history in satellite-based data for different reasons. But I think one of the most prominent in their lab is the emission quantification of point sources. So basically you could then, with satellite data, you could identify, for instance, the spots where you have big CO2 emission or other things. And this, I think, is extremely important, or a game changer in the whole environmental monitoring, because then you have the bird view. So more from the environmental science. And the group also does spectrometers, also has history in startups on hardware development, actually. Good. So that were the examples that I had. Now I tried also a bit to summarize a bit our ideas and incubators, opportunities for teamwork and so forth. So what there on top, we recently, this is more now what we started with student projects at the moment. So tribology in space. So basically everything around friction. There was a big conference at EPFL, I think, some time ago, who organized this, and there was one of our researchers there, and we now started with a student to look at this, because we always look into new material classes, and then there is the space lubricants, which are oils or I don't know, and then you can put fillers, and we basically put our new 2D materials. We have a couple of ideas how we could try this out, and also here it's at student level work at the moment. We would like to do more of this. Corrosion, this is basically, it was mentioned before with the joining. Okay, large-scale surface structuring, sorry, this is a different form of additive manufacturing, maybe a bit difficult to understand in this context. The whole thing of corrosion, also lower Earth orbit, I learned that it's pretty aggressive environment. I always thought, okay, this is maybe not so aggressive, but atomic oxygen, I think, is one of the topics which is extremely important. So here, that is something we're looking at. Then again, we have a huge history in coatings and thin films. Then maybe a bit more big vision, also adding a bit on what you said before, lunar habitation. You thought, of course, as a more biology-centered person about the food. So here, our colleagues, they start to think about construction. That's civil engineers, and they were wondering, okay, can we do something with regolith on the moon? Can we use wire arc additive manufacturing to print big structures, because our civil engineers, they also, when you know, it's also robots printing things, and in civil engineering, how is this working? Semiconductors, we already heard from Oliver before. There we thought, okay, we could in principle contribute in these processes. So there is a startup from Wales we recently discussed. They do CVD, thin film semiconductors. So we could do the defect monitoring to see if they're really better. That's to be seen. But so far, no project. Textiles, we also have a huge history in textiles. I mean, also a long collaboration with the army actually on sensors for pilots actually in the textiles. That could be extended, of course, also to space. I mean, there's nothing against it. Reliability from our electronics team, and propulsion, alternative fuels is also a lot of the topic that we look on in this energy pillar, but nothing yet that we really, let's say, have big projects on, is more on the idea side. Good. Then I hope I was not too long, and thank you for your attention. Good. I think that if somebody has a question, I think probably to all the speakers, it's the opportunity.
I can start following up Thomas' presentation. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. It's not my field, but I understand a bit. I was wondering, so you talk about stem cells. I was wondering if you are in touch with Professor Matteo Moretti in Ticino, in Bellinzona. SUPSI is doing some development, and you were talking about 2D development cells and how to 3D them, basically. And actually, I presented a few of his technology some time ago at TISA. He's doing this kind of development for muscles tissue. So basically, he's doing fibers, and then he's doing some series of those fibers, and then he's doing some bundles to make them in 3D. And the idea at the end is really to burn yourself like really harmful way into space, and you have to basically change your muscle. That could be a way, of course. And he's doing that through 3D printing techniques. He's doing that in Bellinzona. I don't know if you have any contact with him, because of course you are not on the same thing, but at the end, you with stem cells and him with specialized cells, it could have some synergies. So that is my question.
That sounds very interesting. So far, we are not.
So happy to put you in touch with him.
We're collaborating.
Okay.
So, and we're on a proposal that we sent to TISA in the framework of the microgravity. So,
okay, so
and we're collaborating anyways. The link will be made soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for
Please.
Also biosensor made also some about like mental detection.
That was good questions, but I know about the organics and so, but metal in the atmosphere, I don't know what I have to say. Metal in the atmosphere. So that's what they do is laser. That's optical. They do optical. Then, but they also have different possibilities where they can really fly the plane and have sense. But that they also have.
Does it have to have like real time observation? they have to catch samples and analyze it.
Real time analysis. Now I understand. Okay, so when they catch the samples, then they probably need to put it to a spectrometer, a mass spectrometer or something, then back. Yes. If they have something mobile, I mean, for the optical, of course, they could maybe do real time, I guess, but now I'm a bit out of my comfort zone. But if you're interested, you can give me your mail, or you can contact Gerrit. And if you're, I don't know if you're interested also to follow up later a bit in this field, then afterwards I give you his email. Huh? If you pass by afterwards, I give. Yes.
Regarding emails, I would be interested to have the person in charge of 3D printing developments, because currently with CSA we are setting up the roadmap for the next 5 years regarding additive manufacturing in general, not only metal, but also composites and plastics. I mean, this input would be more than welcome, and of course to exchange on that would be interesting. And for him, the advantage also, he will have the future roadmap of CSA regarding 3D printing in general. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think we'll so for the people online, because they don't hear otherwise. So for the people online, thank you also for staying until the end. And for that, we'll close this seminar. And so we'll have also the recording online after for also prosperity. And people will want to look at the information again, and they will continue with the program today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.